Hey everybody, welcome to the second tutorial about JavaScript for complete beginners inside Max MSP. So let's make a short recap of the first tutorial. We saw the JS object, which is an object in which we can write JavaScript code. And if we double click on the object, this editor opens and we can write JavaScript code inside here. But we can also write the code inside programming editor, like for example Visual Studio Code or Sublime or Atom. These are all free text editor for programming languages. So we saw in the code, we saw the AutoWatch attribute, which is basically an attribute of the JS object that we can write directly inside the JS code, which means that every time we save this file from our external editor, the file is going to be updated also inside the JS object. Then we took a look at how to create a variable, how to assign a value to it using the equal, the assignment operator, and then we saw the post function, which lets us post something to the Max console. So for example, if I save now the file, this is going to post the number inside my first variable inside the console. Then we saw how to write a function, and then we saw how to call a function inside a JavaScript file. So this function is going to get called every time I save. So in this tutorial we are going to see three things: scope of variables and functions, if statement, and for loops. All basic stuff, but super important for every programming language. So first of all, what is a scope? Now let's take a look, for example, at this variable, my first variable. This is a global variable because it's declared outside of every scope. It's simply inside the JavaScript file in the uppermost layer that can be in this file. We just write a variable and assign a number to it. And this variable now exists in every part of this file. Now, if it's inside this function, I comment this line out and then I say post my first variable. I will call this function from Max. So I save and I write here my first variable, and then I attach this string to this value. And then I call the function, and then it says my first variable is equal to 10. So I can access this variable inside the test function, because this is a global variable and exists in every part of the file. But let's create now a variable inside test function, and I call it I call it scoped variable. I assign it to 5. And now outside of test function, I will try to say post scoped variable. Let's see what happens. Now when I save, it should actually call this function, and it does, but it gives us an error. It says scoped variable is not defined. And that's because scoped variable only exists inside the test function. So only exists inside test function. So I cannot use it elsewhere. I cannot use this variable somewhere else than inside test function. But if a variable is defined in the global scope, so this is the global scope, then it can be accessed from every part of the program. So every part of the file can access this my first variable. Okay, so this is what is about scope. Just remember that something that is declared in a global scope is accessible to every part of the file, which can be an advantage and can also be a disadvantage. You have to really be careful when declaring global variable for reasons that we are going to see later. So let's now create another function, and let's talk about if statement. So let me create a function, and I will call this function decision tree. Okay, very fancy name for something really simple. Now we give it a value. So an if statement, we use them all the time in Max MSP. For example, when we have a gate object, let me make this bigger. When we have a gate object and we say to the gate object, pass this number out if in the left input you receive a 1. So in case it doesn't receive anything, the gate is just closed. When it receives a 1, then the gate opens. So basically, this is doing an if statement internally, saying if left inlet equal to 1, then the gate is open. So we can write this in basically every programming language using what is called an if statement. For example, if value, which is the argument to our function, so this is just a placeholder for a value that we are going to input into this function. So if value is equal to 0, let's just say post equal to 0. So let's write also a post for putting a new line. So this is actually getting a bit annoying to always have to put a post to go to a new line. So we can also do something like this. We can put this slash, this reverse slash, and a n, and this means already new line. So this will go to a new line. For example, let's try with the previous function. We have to put this inside quotes. So this means now you should go to a new line. So let's try. Exactly. So every time we call the function, it will go to a new line without having to write an empty post. Okay? So this is just useful to know. So this is an if statement. If the value is equal to 0, which means the value is exactly equal to 0. So this is not a single equal means an assignment operator. Is like here, it means we are assigned the value 10 to this function. An equal, this is a Boolean operator. It means is this the same number as 0? And then if this is returns just a 1 or a 0. It's like the equal object in Max. It's exactly the same. Let's actually do like this. If this is equal to 0, this will return a 1, and if it's different from 0, it will return a 0. So, when this is 0, it will return a 1, and when this is 1, it will return a 0. So we can also try with some other numbers. With every different number from 0, it will return 0. When this is equal to 0, it will return 1. This is called a Boolean operator. It's a logic operator that just returns a 1 or a 0. And it's the same that we have inside JavaScript and inside every other programming language. So if it's equal to 0, post equal to 0. Then we can write else, if. So if it's not equal to 0, but it's equal to something else, like if value is equal to 1, then let's post equal to 1. Okay, and of course, else if, let's just finish this else chain. So we can say else, so if none of these condition is satisfied, then post not equal to 0 or 1. And let's go to a new line. Oops, inside a quote. Okay, so if none of these conditions is satisfied, then it will jump to the last possible solution. So it will just post that it's not equal to 0 or 1. So let's create now a message with the same number, the same name of our function, and let's put a $1 so we can dynamically change the numbers here. So let's create a radio group of size 4. So we have 4 different numbers going from 0 to 3, I think. Or is 3 from 1? No, they go from 0 to 3. So if I click on 1, this will say equal to 1. So I forgot an E. Okay, let's save. If I click on 0, it will say equal to 0. If I click on 1, it will say equal to 1. If I click on 2, it will say not equal to 0 or 1. So if I click on 3, it will also say not equal to 0 or 1. If I click on 0, we'll say again equal to 0. This is allows us to make our program go in different directions, okay, according to certain conditions. So, okay, let's now see for loops. So let's go into a new line, and let's create function for loop test, and let's write a for loop. Now, a for loop is a basic tool inside programming which allows us to repeat the same operation multiple times with a single click. It's very similar to an UZI object, which, for example, every time we bang it, will send 10 bang on the, or 10 numbers also out of its outlets. So in this case, it will send 10 numbers from 1 to 10. And for every one of these numbers, we could do, for example, a different operation. Now, a for loops works really in a very similar way. So let's write one. So we have to write for, and then we have to write var, and we have to create a variable that will be used as our counter, as our token counter. So, and let's assign it to 0. So e starts being equal to 0. And then we say in e, it's less than 10. This means if e is less than 10, then go on with the loop. And then we say e equal to e plus 1, which means that e gets incremented of 1 point, of 1 number every iteration of the loop. In order to write this e equal e plus 1, we can simply write e plus plus. This is the same as writing e plus equal e plus 1. So this will, every time, this will add 1 to I. Sorry, I kept on saying e, it's actually I. Sorry for my Italian mispronunciation. So then we open this graph parentheses as we did for the if statement. And then we say, for example, we say post I. And then we go to a new line. So let's clean the console, and let's just write and let's just write here another message with written test for loop. Attach to the JS object, and then let's try now function test for loop. In fact, it's written for loop test. Okay, boom. So we now printed these 10 numbers that go from 0 to 9 because it works like this. First, it starts with I equal to 0. Then it says if I is less than 10, then go on. So it executes what is inside the for loop, and then it adds the number that we chose, in this case 1, to I. And then it goes on with a new operation, with a new iteration. So again, it starts from here and it says, is I still less than 10? Yes. Execute was inside the loop, then add 1 to I. And it goes on until I is equal to 10. So actually, let's start with I equal to 9. So when I is equal to 9, it's still less than 10, so it executes what's inside the for loop, and then it sums 1 to 9. Now I is equal to 10. So 10 is not less than 10, so it exits at this point the for loop, and the program can finish its execution. Okay, so it goes from 0 to 9, and then the loop is over. Now let's try to make something interesting with the for loop. So let's create a new variable and call this variable lines. And this will be the hashtag sign, the hashtag character. I don't know what it's called. Let's say this is the hashtag character. So let's do something like this. Lines equal lines plus, and let's add another asterisk. Another hashtag character. We can write the same exact thing, just like this, lines plus equal to to this character. So this will sum at every iteration. This will add an hashtag character at the end of the line. So let's post here lines, and then let's go into a new line. So plus new line, and let's try this. Let's clean the console. And so you can see that it will create kind of a pyramid. So if we want to start with a single character, we have two ways. Either we start with an empty string, and we will have one single character at the beginning and 9 in the end. Or we can start with a character and then add the other character after we post. Okay, so first it will post and then add the character. We will have the same result. But let's now say that instead of having a triangle like this, let's say we want a pyramid. So we want on both sides to go up and then down. So let's make a pyramid. To do that, I mean, there are a lot of ways, but the simpler way that it comes to my mind is simply to use a couple of for loops. So we have to remove the lines variable from outside the for loop and put it inside actually the for loop. So at every iteration of the for loop, this is going to create a new line and is going to print it. Let's actually create a variable called sides, and let's use it instead of this 10 here. This will come in end later. So we simply replace this number 10 with the name of the variable, which is the same as using the number. Okay, so let's create a variable lines inside of the for loop. So if we execute the function now, it will simply print 10 times the variable, the line with the hashtag character. So after that, let's create actually another for loop. And usually the second for loop, we use a j as a character to differentiate it from the first for loop. And let's set j equal to 0. And let's say until j is less than sides minus I, and then j plus plus. So what does this mean? We have to start with a lot of spaces, right? We have to start with a lot of spaces, and we have to diminish the spaces when we go down on the pyramid, right? We have to do something like this. So we want to start with a lot of spaces. So we want to start, for example, with 10 spaces. But actually it's not 10. It's actually sides minus 1, because I can maximum arrive to 9. So it starts from 0 and it arrives to 9. So we will start with 9 spaces. And then when I gets bigger, j will put less spaces, because sides, this number here, so let's put it all inside a parenthesis. This number here will get smaller as I gets bigger. So when we start, this will be 9, because sides is equal to 10. Minus 1 is equal to 9. And then 9 minus 0, because the first time I is 0, then is equal to 9. Then the second time when I will be bigger, then it will be, when I will be 1, then this will be 8. And then this will be 9 minus 2 equal 2 will be 7, and so on. Okay. So exactly. So this will add some spaces to our string. So let's put actually an empty space, and let's try like that. No, sorry, I did something wrong. So let's see, j equals 0, j minus less than Oh yeah, sure, it's actually working, but I'm adding the spaces after the hashtag character. I actually have to add the hashtag character after this. So let's try. Oh, and now I have to actually say plus equal, because otherwise... so let's actually have first to declare the variable. So var lines equal to an empty string. Then I add the spaces, and then I add the hashtag character. So let's try. Okay. So now we start with 9 spaces, and then we go down to 0 spaces. Okay. Now we just have to create another for loop. Let's say var k. This is usually the next variable that is used. And now let's say that k must be less than I. K plus plus. So if k is less than I, it means that we will put hashtags inside lines for how many times I has already iterated. So how many times the main for loop has already been executed. So for example, the first execution, we actually should say minus or equal to I. So in the first execution, this will just put 1, then the second execution, this will put 2, and so on. So let's try. Exactly, it prints a pyramid. If we want to add a space between the, the characters, let's try. We actually then have to add 2 spaces here. No. Let's try add another space here. Boom. Okay. So now we have a pyramid. Oh, this I ate. Okay. So now we have a pyramid that looks good. Okay. So we add 2 spaces here. And then we add another 2 spaces in between the hashtag character. This keeps the design kind of right. Oops, I forgot to add one thing, which is that this pyramid is resizable at our choice. So, for example, by default is a pyramid that makes 10 floors, let's say, 10 layers. But we can change this is why we created the size variable. We can change this with an argument to our function. So, for example, we can say 20, and this will make 20 floors. We can say 100, and this will make 100 floors. Let's see how it looks like. Oh, it's pretty big. It's pretty big pyramid. Okay, so basically this function using this variable here can be resized to, can be scaled to any number. Okay. Okay, so I will stop for now with that, and I hope this is clear enough. If there are some questions, just ask me, but also you can write some questions in the comment. And remember that to find out how the program works, just execute every single step at a time in your head or on a piece of paper. Just write down which are the values of these variables every time, and you will find out how the program works. So just remember that these for loops gets executed every time these for loops makes an iteration. The for loops inside makes a set of iterations according to the value that we write here. So these for loops will execute as many times as this condition is satisfied. So this is it for the second tutorial, and let's see you on the next one. Ciao.